Morning, 9:30 to 10:30. Guam, North Field. 19th Bomb Group Headquarters. Major Sam Sammy Bokshes dressed with precision, long khaki trousers, polished low-quarter shoes. Around him, other crews had cut their uniforms short against the tropical heat. Bokshes never understood casualness. He carried two operational secrets in his head, words that would redefine the air war against Japan: low level. No guns. B-29 Superfortresses glinted under the sun, their wings stretching 141 feet over coral pavement. Crews called them silver cigars. Mechanics worked through the humid morning, checking engines, sealing fuel caps, and securing the strange new incendiary loads inside the bomb bays. Same morning, Saipan, Isley Field. 870th Bombardment Squadron, Quonset Huts. Staff Sergeant Carl Barthold, 21 years old, Missouri-born, rail thin at 142 pounds, rode home in his bunk. His right blister gunner packed every belonging into his B-4 bag and left it centered on his cot, ritual of men who didn't expect to return. Barthold muttered, "That guy's got me spooked." Outside, he could see Isley Field, once Japanese, now rebuilt for the B-29s, two 8,500-foot runways, parking for 100 bombers, and an ocean horizon that swallowed aircraft whole when takeoffs failed. 11:30 hours. Tinian, North Field. 313th Bomb Wing Area. 38 square miles of coral, jungle, and dust. 3 finished runways, a 4th under construction. Parking revetments for 265 Superfortresses, the busiest airfield on Earth. Across the water lay Tokyo, codename Meetinghouse, 6 million people living in wood and paper houses that doubled as workshops. Japan's capital had almost no civil defense, few fire engines, and virtually no air raid shelters. It was a city built to burn. 1,300 hours. 21st Bomber Command Headquarters. Field Order Number 43. Printed the previous day. 314th Wing, Guam attack at 5,000 to 5,800 feet. 313th Wing, Tinian 5,000 to 5,800 feet. 73rd Wing, Saipan 7,000 to 7,800 feet. Formations were abolished. Each bomber would fly alone, separated only by altitude. No American heavy bombers had ever attacked a major target this low. Afternoon, Guam. 19th Group Briefing. A tense exchange between Major Bokshes and Captain Gordon Muster, regular pilot of Tall, in the saddle. Bokshes, the squadron commander, would take command tonight. Muster would move to co-pilot. Both men knew what low-level, no guns meant, increased accuracy at the cost of safety. Late afternoon, Saipan, Isley Field. Hardstand 12. Captain James M. Campbell's Pathfinder crew assembled beside their aircraft. The silver bomber loomed above them, 4-bladed propellers still. Ground crews had already loaded incendiaries and filled the tanks. Barthold climbed through the nose wheel hatch, settled into his cramped radio compartment beside the turret bulkhead. Interphone chatter. "Goddamn LeMay's gonna get us killed." "Cut it out," Campbell replied. Interphone discipline, gentlemen. 17:36 hours. Guam, North Field. Brigadier General Thomas "Tommy" Power led the first wave down the runway. Major General Curtis E. LeMay watched from a jeep with his Chief of Staff, Brigadier General August Kistner. LeMay, cigar clenched, said quietly to his public relations officer, St. Clair McKelway, "If I'm sending these men to die, they'll string me up for it." He would not fly tonight. He knew too much about a secret new weapon, the atomic bomb, and could not risk capture. 1736 to 1900 hours. Marianas Islands. 6 runways, 3 islands. Over 334 B-29s launched in 2 hours and 45 minutes, a record. On Saipan, pilots held their wheels to the runway until the last 100 yards, then hauled back and dropped sharply toward the ocean to gain airspeed before climbing out. Many failed this maneuver. Those who survived watched the cliffs slide beneath their bellies in darkness. Engines roared, red exhaust flickering across coral strips. One by one, the bombers lifted into the Pacific dusk. En route. Night over the western Pacific. Below, the ocean glowed faintly, bioluminescent currents forming ghostly highways beneath the wings. Inside, navigators worked with sextants and dead reckoning. Radio calls were sparse. Weather ahead promised strong. Dry winds over Tokyo, perfect for spreading fire. A gunner noted later, those glowing lines below looked like the freeways of hell. 23:50 hours. Guam Headquarters. LeMay sat awake in his Quonset hut, waiting for the first bombs away report. He could not sleep. McKelway waited with him. They spoke little. LeMay broke the silence. "We won't hear anything for half an hour. You want a Coca-Cola? Let's drink it in the car." They sat in the dark, two men without rank between them, facing the jungle and the sound of insects, waiting for news from the 1,000 young men, now inbound to Tokyo. 0:15 to 0:30, March 10, 1945. The approach to Honshu. Choshi Point, initial point. Bombers turned west toward Tokyo Bay. Crews tightened their flak vests, checked helmets and interphones. Japanese searchlights probed the haze. Anti-aircraft bursts flared below 5,000 feet, erratic, uncoordinated. Night fighters never appeared. Briefing rumors had promised a gap in flak coverage between 5,500 and 10,000 feet. It wasn't quite true, but the bombers slipped through. 0:45 hours. Pathfinders on target. Barthold's crew opened bomb bay doors. E-46 clusters dropped away into the dark. The first X was marked across the sleeping city. Behind them, 300 more superfortresses followed the glowing trails toward the heart of Tokyo. Early evening, March 9, 1945. The Marianas Islands. Across Guam, Saipan, and Tinian, more than 10,000 airmen prepared for the largest single bombing mission of the Pacific War. A writer later called them the 1,000 Kids. In truth, there were several thousand, most in their early 20s, some barely out of high school, charged with carrying America's heaviest bomber into Japan's night skies. Guam, North Field, 93rd Bombardment Squadron, 16:30 hours. Major Sammy Bakshis, age 34, stood out among the young crews. 6'1", nearly 200 pounds, calm, methodical, and older than most of his men by a decade. He came from Fergus County, Montana, and had once courted his wife Aldora with the gift of an airplane ride. Now he commanded the B-29, tall in the saddle. The name fit. No one in her regular crew was under 6 feet tall. Tonight Bakshis would occupy the left-hand seat, relegating Captain Gordon Muster to co-pilot duty. Neither man liked it, but orders were orders. 1,700 hours. Saipan, Isley Field. 497 Bomb Group Briefing Hall. Inside a corrugated steel Quonset hut, hundreds of crewmen sat shoulder to shoulder. Cigarette smoke thickened the air as the intelligence officer stepped to the stage. Behind him, a huge wall map of Japan glowed under yellow lamps. The weather officer briefed first. Winds out of the northwest, steady dry. Conditions ideal for incendiaries. Next, the intelligence chief. Target area, Meetinghouse Sector, Tokyo. Expect anti-aircraft fire, limited fighter opposition. Altitude, 7,000 to 7,800 feet. Time over target, between 0:45 and 3 o'clock hours. Someone in the back muttered, "That low. Jesus." No one laughed. 17:15 hours. Tinian, North Field Briefing Tent. 313th Wing. Brigadier General John H. Davies addressed his men bluntly. "Gentlemen, accuracy has been unacceptable. Tonight we correct that. No formations. No guns. You'll go in low and burn the target flat. If this works, we'll end the war faster." Behind him hung diagrams of Tokyo's eastern wards, factory blocks, and residential grids. In red pencil, Meetinghouse Primary. 17:45 hours. Across all fields. Pre-flight ritual. Mechanics crawled under nacelles with flashlights. Armorers checked bomb racks and fusing timers. Each B-29 carried between 1,700 and 2,000 incendiary bomblets, M69s in E-46 cluster canisters. When dropped, each canister would burst open at 2,500 feet, scattering 47 small bombs filled with napalm-like jellied gasoline. Every 100 bombers meant nearly 100,000 separate fires. Ground crews double-checked fuel levels, 7,000 gallons of high-octane aviation gasoline per plane. Every pound mattered. Removing guns and ammunition saved weight, allowing more fuel and bombs. No one ignored the implication. If intercepted, they would be defenseless. 1,800 hours. Saipan, near the cliffs above Isley Field. Carl Barthold stepped outside his Quonset hut for a last look at the ocean. He could still see white surf breaking against the cliffs where months earlier hundreds of Japanese civilians had leapt to their deaths rather than surrender. The sky was turning gold. He thought of home, of Missouri fields in spring. When he turned back toward the base, trucks were already moving, headlights dimmed under blackout covers. 18:15 hours. Guam, North Field. Lineup inspection. Major Bakshas and his crew of tall in the saddle walked around their bomber. Mechanics had chalked maintenance notes across the landing gear doors. One crewman brushed his fingers along the aluminum skin, polished clean by the ground crew. The four Wright R-3350 duplex Cyclone engines waited, cold and silent. Each would produce 2,200 horsepower at takeoff if it didn't catch fire. Bakshas nodded once. Let's start her up. 18:30 hours. Engines start sequence. Across 3 islands, propellers began to spin. A dull thunder rolled across the Marianas as nearly 1,300 Wright engines roared to life. Exhaust flames licked the night, orange and violent against the darkening sky. Inside tall in the saddle, flight engineer, 2nd Lieutenant Leland P. Fishback ran the checklist. Oil pressure green. Manifold temp rising. Turbos stable. Bakshas kept his expression neutral, fingers on the yoke. Muster adjusted the throttles. In the interphone, someone whispered, "Here we go." 19 to 2000 hours. Departure waves. Takeoffs began in sequence, one aircraft every 90 seconds. The air smelled of hot oil and burned aviation fuel. Each bomber, fully loaded, weighed over 65 tons, more than the runway could truly handle. On Saipan, pilots held their wheels to the ground until the last 200 feet, then pulled up sharply, clearing the coral cliffs by meters before dipping toward the sea to build speed. Some failed. Those who didn't watch the ocean flash white beneath their bellies before climbing into the tropical night. 2100 hours. Over open ocean, heading north. Radio discipline was strict, only mission calls, no chatter. At 8,000 feet, the temperature dropped sharply. Crews switched to oxygen. Barthold sat alone in his radio station, earphones pressed tight, code books ready. The sound of 4 big engines filled the fuselage like steady thunder. He sent and received position reports in Morse, his fingers tapping automatically, eyes fixed on dials that glowed faint blue. Behind him, the crew dozed in shifts. Ahead of them, 1,500 miles of dark Pacific water. 22:30 hours. Somewhere north of Iwo Jima. Navigation lights were off. No moon. Only stars. Navigator John Hagedorn crawled into the Astrodome above the bomb bay, sextant in hand, marking positions against Polaris and Vega. He calculated drift, corrected headings, and passed coordinates forward. Bakshas flew by instruments, occasionally glancing at the dim horizon. He knew what waited ahead, a city the size of Chicago, built from wood and paper, and a wind ready to feed the fire. 23:15 hours. Inside the radio compartment, B-29 Star Duster. Carl Barthold logged the last routine transmission before silence. He opened a Hershey bar from a ration pack, took one bite, and looked out through a small blister window. The sea below shimmered faintly, bioluminescent plankton stirred by the slipstream. To his eyes, it looked like glowing highways across black glass. He thought, this is the last quiet I'll ever know. 23:50 hours. Guam, 21st Bomber Command Headquarters. Major General LeMay sat in his dim Quonset hut, unable to rest. His public affairs officer, St. Clair McKelway, waited with him. LeMay, we won't get a bombs away for half an hour. McKelway, sir, want me to fetch something? LeMay, Coca-Cola. 2. We'll drink them in the car. They sat together in silence, facing the jungle outside the command post. In the distance, the last of the bombers lifted from Tinian. 10,000 men were now inbound to Tokyo. 010 hours, March 10, 1945. 300 miles east of Honshu. The first radar echoes of Japan appeared on the scopes. The coast of Choshi marked the initial point, the turn toward Tokyo Bay. Crews clipped on their flak vests and helmets. Engines droned without complaint. The low-altitude strike force was on course. 030 hours. Over the Kanto Plain. The first Pathfinder aircraft from the 497th Bombardment Group approached the eastern edge of Tokyo Bay. Below lay the world's largest wooden city, a patchwork of tile roofs, bamboo beams, and paper walls stretching to the horizon. Code name, Meetinghouse, the designated urban target area covering 16 square miles of industrial and residential Tokyo. From 8,000 feet, the city seemed peaceful, almost fragile. There were no searchlights yet, no blackout visible. Some crews swore Tokyo still glowed with ordinary street lamps, as if unaware of what was coming. 035 hours. Tokyo urban layout and vulnerability. Tokyo's construction made it a city designed to ignite. Nearly 90% of its buildings were made from wood, cedar, and pine. Sliding paper doors, shoji, divided homes and workshops. Beneath thin roof tiles, bamboo lattice frames created perfect ventilation for fire. Each neighborhood doubled as a miniature industrial complex. Families produced aircraft fittings, cartridge cases, uniform buttons, and electrical wiring for the war effort. Every house was both a dwelling and a factory, and every factory was made of fuel. Fire breaks existed only in theory. Most canals and rivers were narrow and lined with wood piers that would themselves burn. 040 hours. Japanese civil defense readiness. Civil defense in Tokyo was tragically symbolic. By March 1945, the city had a firefighting force of 8,100 men, fewer than New York City's, despite a population 8 times larger. Many fire engines were immobile due to a shortage of mechanics. Each household officially possessed a bucket, a shovel, and a small water barrel. Most used them for laundry. Air raid shelters were shallow and flooded easily. Deeper ones were impossible to dig near the bay because of groundwater. Families often stayed in their homes when sirens wailed, believing the Americans could not hit anything accurately. They were wrong. 045 hours. B-29 Pathfinders over Tokyo Bay. Lead aircraft released radar chaff, aluminum strips scattering across the night sky, confusing Japanese radar scopes. The navigators called the IP, turning Poinchoshi course 265. Bomb bay doors opened. The first E-46 incendiary clusters dropped. Each canister contained 47 M69 bomblets, small cylinders packed with napalm gel. At 2,500 feet above the city, fuses popped open. The bomblets tumbled, cords unraveling, ignition charges armed. 3 seconds later, detonation. Each bomblet released a jet of burning gel, nearly 100 feet long, clinging to everything it touched. The gel burned at 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit. A white X began to form across the eastern districts of Tokyo, a signal for the main force that would follow. 050 hours. The city below. At ground level, a few sirens began to sound. 8-year-old Yukiko Hiragama, awake near the Sumida River, remembered the first flashes. The sky cracked open and a rain of fire fell like snow. Within minutes, the wind, blowing at 25 knots, carried burning debris across rooftops. Fire spread in streaks, jumping alleys and canals as if alive. 055 hours. Japanese defense response. Searchlights flicked on. Anti-aircraft guns opened sporadic fire, their bursts reaching 4,000 feet, far below most of the approaching bombers. Japan's 10th Flying Division scrambled 210 night fighters, but coordination failed. Ground radar could not track low-level intruders. Fighters never found the bombers. Observers reported barrage balloons rising over the city, but none actually existed, only confusion and rumor. For Tokyo's defenders, the sky was chaos. Invisible aircraft, deafening engines, a rain of sparks descending faster than orders could be given. 1 o'clock hours. Main force arrival. 300 more Superfortresses crossed the bay in single file, separated by altitude blocks of 500 feet. Each released its incendiaries over the glowing X already burning on the ground. Within 10 minutes, fires erupted in Kodo, Chua, and Sumida wards, densely packed areas of wooden homes and cottage factories. The fire front stretched over 3 miles and expanded by the second. Wind funneled flames into narrow streets, turning them into blowtorches. Oxygen vanished. Temperatures climbed past 1,500 degrees Fahrenheit, 815 degrees Celsius at street level. 110 hours. Airborne observations. From 8,000 feet, Staff Sergeant Carl Barthold saw Tokyo flicker, then ignite completely. His radio headset carried fragments of interphone chatter. Jesus, look at that. It's one solid sheet of fire. Below them, the city's grid transformed into an orange vortex. Roof tiles exploded under the heat. Entire blocks vanished in less than 5 minutes. Barthold noted later, you could smell the burning through the vents, even at altitude. 120 hours. Inside the inferno. Eyewitness accounts from survivors described the wind turning to fire itself. Flames sucked air upward, creating a firestorm that generated its own hurricane, estimated winds exceeding 120 miles per hour. People were lifted from the streets, drawn into the heat. The Sumida River boiled. Asphalt streets melted. Wooden bridges collapsed under waves of superheated air. Thousands who fled toward canals drowned as fire consumed the oxygen above the water. Those who stayed in their homes were incinerated in seconds. 1:30 hours. Command Aircraft, General Tommy Power. From 7,000 feet, Brigadier General Thomas S. Power observed through the plexiglass nose of his B-29. He used a red crayon to mark burning districts on his map, drawing excess until the crayon was gone. His navigator reported, entire eastern sector aflame. Power wiped his eyes. Poor bastards, he whispered. He stayed on station for 90 minutes, directing the last bombers to spread the fire north and west toward Ueno and Asakusa. 1:45 hours. Individual aircraft performance. The B-29s, stripped of guns, flew lighter and faster than usual. Their R-3350 engines, notorious for overheating, ran cooler at low altitude thanks to the dense night air. Most aircraft performed flawlessly. However, fuel consumption was high. Crews calculated they would land with minimal reserves. Each bombardier watched as his incendiaries fell into the burning grid, then closed the bomb bay doors and turned south, climbing slowly back toward the Pacific. 2:00 hours. Visibility from 100 miles. The glow from Tokyo's burning districts was visible to navigators 100 miles away. The column of fire reached 18,000 feet, merging with clouds. Smoke spread eastward over the bay, reflecting red light on the underbellies of departing aircraft. From the air, the city resembled a molten sea. From the ground, there was no distinction between air, earth, and fire. 2:15 hours. Casualty escalation. In less than 90 minutes, 16 square miles of Tokyo had been erased. Entire wards, Fukagawa, Honjo, and Sumida, ceased to exist. Estimates of civilian deaths already exceeded 100,000, most of them women, children, and the elderly. Another 1 million were left homeless. The Imperial Palace and its immediate grounds remained untouched by deliberate order, but everything around it was gone. 2:30 hours. Withdrawal. The last B-29s cleared the target area, engines straining under heat turbulence. Flak continued sporadically but weakly. No night fighters appeared. Crews looked back at Tokyo's burning perimeter, stretching unbroken for miles. One gunner remarked over the interphone, "We just lit up half the world." The Marianas Islands in Tokyo, March 1945. The most destructive fire in human history began not with explosives or high-velocity shells, but with chemistry, jellied gasoline, magnesium, and simple physics. The science behind it was cold, calculated, and American. Background: the technology of fire. In late 1944, U.S. Ordnance Laboratories at Edgewood Arsenal, Maryland, and the National Defense Research Committee refined a new class of incendiary weapon, the E-46 cluster containing M69 bomblets. Each M69 was an aluminum tube, 20 inches long and 3 inches in diameter, weighing 6 pounds. Inside it sat a rubberized sack filled with napalm gel, a thickened mixture of gasoline, benzene, and powdered aluminum soap. An explosive charge in the nose forced the burning gel from the casing 3 seconds after impact, creating a 100-foot jet of flame that adhered to surfaces and burned for up to 10 minutes. Tests at Dugway Proving Ground, Utah, showed that one M69 could ignite a wooden house in under 2 minutes. The cluster mechanism. 47 of these bomblets were strapped inside a thin-walled steel cylinder, the E-46. A single B-29 carried up to 40 such clusters, each fused to burst at a preset altitude of 2,000 to 2,500 feet. When released, the cluster split apart, scattering a fan of bomblets across an area roughly 2,500 feet long and 500 feet wide, about 6 city blocks per aircraft. The clusters tumbled through the air, igniting on impact, their individual fires combining into larger infernos. In total, the Tokyo raid dropped nearly 1,665 tons of these incendiaries, over 470,000 individual firebombs. Secondary weapons. The lead aircraft, including General Power's command bomber, carried the M47A2 Incendiary, a 100-pound thin-walled bomb filled with petroleum jelly and white phosphorus. Upon impact, it burst into flames, spreading the sticky gel across building interiors, igniting the wood structure from within. Other planes carried E-28 clusters, similar to the E-46, but containing heavier napalm units for deeper penetration into warehouses and factory roofs. Why fire? Major General Curtis E. LeMay, commanding the 21st Bomber Command, had been forced to acknowledge the failure of high-altitude precision bombing. At 28,000 feet, the jet stream over Japan, unknown before 1944, threw bombs off target by miles. Navigation was unreliable and accuracy near zero. LeMay's decision: attack low at night with incendiaries instead of explosives. The goal was not to hit single factories, but to erase the industrial base hidden in Japan's urban fabric and to break civilian morale through shock and displacement. He called it urban area bombing. The men who carried it out called it fire job. American production capability. By early 1945, the United States could produce up to 500,000 M69 bomblets per day. Factories in Michigan, Pennsylvania, and California assembled them in vast numbers. Each unit cost roughly $2.50, cheap, simple, and devastating. Japanese intelligence had reports of such weapons, but underestimated both the volume and the delivery system. They expected occasional raids, not industrialized fire. Technical comparison: Japanese versus U.S. response. Japanese firefighting water pressure averaged 35 psi, inadequate to project streams onto burning rooftops. The M69's napalm burned hotter than water could extinguish. Smothering, not cooling, was required, yet civilians were instructed to throw sand or blankets. By contrast, the American engineering behind the incendiaries was optimized for urban airflow. U.S. engineers modeled Japanese house construction in full-scale mock-ups at Dugway, testing airflow patterns to ensure that flames would propagate through interconnected wooden structures. The chimney effect was deliberate design, not accident. Tokyo, a perfect laboratory. The Honjo, Fukagawa, and Kodo wards were packed with narrow lanes and single-story houses, ideal fuel geometry. The 25-knot wind that night created a self-sustaining convection system. Each fresh bomber's drop added fuel to an already developing thermal column. Within 30 minutes, small blazes merged into a continuous fire front more than 5 kilometers wide. LeMay's staff later described the phenomenon clinically. The coalescence of incendiary points reached ignition density exceeding any prior model. The firestorm consumed oxygen faster than new air could flow in, creating a partial vacuum at ground level that sucked fresh air and new fires inward. People caught in it suffocated before they could burn. Post-raid analysis: LeMay's gamble. Back on Guam, LeMay's planners calculated efficiency. Bomb load per aircraft: 16,000 to 18,000 pounds. Area destroyed: 16 square miles. Result: 96% incendiary efficiency rate, the highest of the war. LeMay's gamble had worked militarily. Morally, it raised questions that would haunt everyone involved. Years later, his staff officer Robert S. McNamara recalled, "If we'd lost the war, we would have been tried as war criminals." And he was right. But at that moment, the calculus was simple. The operation had achieved its goal. Tokyo's industrial capacity was crippled, its people displaced in millions. Fire had succeeded where explosives had failed. 2:30 hours, March 10, 1945. Over the target. From 5,000 feet, Tall in the Saddle and other aircraft still inbound could see the reflected light of the burning city 100 miles ahead. Inside the cockpit, Bakshas tightened his harness. His navigator, Hagedorn, called range to target 30 minutes out. The B-29 glided through the smoke stream toward the inferno, toward the largest fire in recorded history, created by the cold arithmetic of incendiary science. Guam, Saipan, and Tinian, March 9, 1945, afternoon to evening. Before the engines roared and the firebombs fell, there were hours of waiting, of maps, charts, and men trying to look calm while their hands shook. The last daylight on the Marianas Islands burned gold across coral airfields as 330 B-29 Superfortresses stood ready. The mission that would redefine the Pacific Air War began in rooms filled with cigarette smoke, humidity, and doubt. 1,300 hours. Guam, 314th Bomb Wing Briefing Hall. Inside a Quonset hut the size of a hangar, crews of the 19th Bomb Group filed in with clipboards under their arms. The air smelled of sweat, canvas, and kerosene. A wall-sized map of Japan dominated the front. Red string traced the 1,500-mile route north to the target, labeled in block letters, Meetinghouse. Colonel E.A. Anderson, Group Commander, opened the session. "Tonight we do this different. Low level, no formation, no guns. We fly singly, not in groups. Your protection is darkness and altitude separation." He paused, letting the silence settle. Gentlemen, this is not a suicide mission, unless we make it one. A few uneasy laughs. No one felt reassured. 13:20 hours. Technical brief. The weather officer, a young lieutenant with damp papers, stepped forward. Target area clear. Winds from northwest at 25 knots. Surface temperature 35 degrees Fahrenheit. Dry air mass, ideal for incendiary spread. He hesitated, glancing at LeMay's staff officers in the back. Everyone knew what ideal for incendiary spread meant, that the fire would be uncontrollable. Next came the intelligence officer. He displayed aerial photos of Tokyo, dense wooden grids, rail yards, and small workshops. Primary industrial zones are here, and here. Civil defense minimal. Expected flak at 5,000 feet and below. Limited night fighter capability. He clicked off the projector. Questions? None came. 13:45 hours. Psychological edge. When the officers left, the enlisted men whispered among themselves. Some had flown over Tokyo before, high freezing, missing their targets by miles. This was different. This time they would fly through the city, not above it. In the back row, Flight Engineer Leland Fishback muttered to his pilot, Captain Muster, no guns, no escort, no formation. Might as well paint targets on our wings. Muster shrugged. Maybe the Japs will be too surprised to shoot. 14:30 hours. Saipan, 73rd Bomb Wing briefing. At Isley Field, Captain James M. Campbell's Pathfinder crew assembled with others from the 497th Bomb Group. The commanding officer pointed to a clock on the wall. Pathfinders launch at 17:15. You will arrive at the target 45 minutes before the main body. Your job, drop marker flares and start the burn pattern. Campbell raised a hand. Sir, confirm altitude. 7,000 feet. Keep your bomb doors open as little as possible. Heat from the fires may affect lift on return. Barthold, the radio operator, wrote that down carefully. Heat affecting lift, something no one had ever briefed before. 15:10 hours. Tinian, North Field. 313th Bomb Wing, operations. Brigadier General John H. Davies addressed his wing. His words were pragmatic, not stirring. We're out of options. Precision hasn't worked. These weapons will. Behind him, staff officers distributed mimeographed sheets listing fuel loads, bomb loads, altitudes, and timings. Each bomber would depart in 2-minute intervals. No formations meant no mutual defense. It also meant radar tracking by the Japanese would be nearly impossible, hundreds of lone aircraft coming from multiple directions. 1600 hours. Tension and superstition. In tent cities and Quonset huts, crews packed personal effects. Many men left notes, watches, or letters on their bunks, unspoken insurance against not returning. The right blister gunner in Barthold's crew packed everything into his B-4 bag and placed it squarely at the center of his cot. When Barthold asked why, the man replied, because I want to look tidy when they come to take my stuff. The room fell silent after that. 16:30 hours. Guam. General's Conference. Major General Curtis E. LeMay, compact, unsmiling, and already chewing his habitual cigar, stood before his group commanders. A wall clock ticked loudly in the background. Gentlemen, we've wasted too many men flying high. We go in low tonight. You will strip guns except tail turrets. You'll carry more gas, more incendiaries. No formation. No flare drops over target. The first bombs will be the signal. An officer hesitated. Sir, the risk. I know the risk. That's my job. Yours is to burn the target. LeMay's right cheek twitched, his Bell's palsy making his grimace look even harder. He dismissed the room with a nod. No further discussion. 1700 hours. Crews returned to quarters. The sun sank low behind the palms. Pilots and engineers ate early rations of powdered eggs and canned fruit cocktail. Coffee steamed in tin mugs. Conversations were brief, mechanical, fuel ratios, engine temperatures, radio protocols. No one spoke of fear, not directly. But every man thought about the Pacific, the endless dark stretch between here and Japan, and the possibility of running out of fuel before dawn. 17:15 hours. Saipan, Isley Field. Pathfinder briefing ends. The crews rose together. Helmets under their arms, flight jackets zipped. The intelligence officer called out final words. Target area is dense civilian. Avoid Imperial Palace sector. Everything else is fair game. Barthold looked at his pilot, Captain Campbell. Everything else, he repeated quietly. 1730 hours. Equipment issue and arming. Ground crews distributed flak vests, oxygen masks, codebooks, and escape kits. Each crewman checked his May West life preserver, parachute harness, and sidearm. Mechanics crawled beneath the wings, pulling away red-painted safety pins from bomb fuses. Once those pins were out, the mission had begun, even if no one had left the ground yet. 1745 hours. Personal thoughts. In his logbook, Carl Barthold wrote a single line before boarding. Weather good. Target Tokyo. No one says it, but we're scared. At the same hour on Guam, Major Sammy Boxes checked his flight manifest. He saw the familiar list of crew names, young men who trusted him. He closed the clipboard slowly and said to his co-pilot, Gordon Muster, "You can't think about what's down there. Just fly the airplane." 1800 hours. Final call. Trucks rumbled down coral roads, headlights covered. Crews climbed aboard with parachutes slung over their shoulders. Engines began to cough and catch, one after another, until the night shook with sound. Somewhere near the control tower, a loudspeaker called over the roar. "This is it, boys. Let's make it count." The briefings were over. The doubts remained, but there was no turning back now. Guam, Saipan, and Tinian, March 9, 1945, 1715 to 1930 hours. The tropical sun slipped beneath the horizon as the free islands became engines of thunder. Across coral airfields, 334 B-29 Superfortresses waited, line nose to tail. The largest bomber armada in the Pacific was about to rise into the night. 1715 hours. Saipan, Isley Field. Pathfinder departure. At Hard Stand 12, Captain James M. Campbell's crew of the Star Duster completed final checks. Staff Sergeant Carl Barthold, radio operator, ran his hand over the transmitter panel, feeling the faint hum through the metal. Outside, the ground chief gave a thumbs up. Engines 1 through 4 turned in sequence, propellers blurring into halos of fire as magnetos caught. Each Wright R3350 duplex Cyclone engine produced 2,200 horsepower and a distinctive whine that carried through the humid air. Over the interphone, Campbell's voice came steady. "All stations green. Brakes off. Let's go." The bomber rolled forward into darkness, wheels thundering against the coral. 1736 hours. Guam, North Field. 314th Bomb Wing. Brigadier General Thomas "Tommy" Power led the first wave. His aircraft, laden with M47A2 incendiaries, began its takeoff run. At the edge of the runway, Major General Curtis E. LeMay stood with Brigadier General August Kissner, watching silently from a jeep. LeMay's cigar glowed red in the dusk. "If I'm sending these men to die," he murmured to Kissner, "they'll hang me for it." Powers B-29 lifted from the runway, wheels folding up as it skimmed the edge of the jungle and dipped toward the sea, gaining speed before climbing into the fading light. Behind it, one after another, the silver bombers followed, a machine rhythm measured in minutes and miles. 1745 to 1830 hours. The takeoff sequence. On Guam, 6 parallel runways functioned like conveyor belts. On Tinian, the 3 coral strips were packed nose to tail with aircraft. On Saipan, 2 long runways handled both Pathfinders and the main wing. The choreography was astonishing. 1 B-29 every 60 to 90 seconds, 3 islands in synchrony, all timed to converge over Japan's eastern coast within the same 3-hour window. Never before had so many heavy bombers been launched from so little land. Each pilot held the aircraft down until the final 200 yards of runway, then pulled back sharply, climbing barely over the cliff's edge. For a moment the plane seemed to fall, skimming the surf to gain airspeed before slowly rising into the purple dusk. 1810 hours. Guam. B-29 tall in the saddle. Major Sammy Boxes eased the throttles forward. Engines 1 through 4 set for 50 inches manifold, 2,700 revolutions per minute. Flight Engineer Leland Fishback confirmed, "All green, sir. Temps holding." The aircraft rolled heavy, 70,000 pounds of fuel and incendiaries. The end of the runway approached like a deadline. "Rotate." Boxes hauled back. The Superfortress lurched skyward, dipped toward the ocean, and then leveled, engines roaring steady. Captain Gordon Muster, now co-pilot, exhaled. "We're airborne, Sam." "Yeah," Boxes said quietly. "Let's keep it that way." 1830 to 1915 hours. across the Marianas. Engines howled. Dust clouds rolled across the airfields as one bomber after another disappeared into the horizon. On the ground, maintenance crews shaded their eyes, counting aircraft as they vanished. Men had seen too many B-29s fail on takeoff, blown tires, overheated engines, collapses at the runway's end. But tonight, miraculously, the launches held. One by one, 334 bombers climbed northward into the Pacific night. A line of faint red exhausts stretched across the sky, disappearing into starlight. 1920 hours. Command observation Guam. LeMay and McKelway stood near the control tower, surrounded by the diminishing roar. McKelway later wrote, "The sound of 334 B-29s leaving one after another was like the earth itself opening and closing." LeMay spoke quietly, almost to himself. No formation, no escort, no safety nets. Just faith and planning, and a bit of luck. He turned toward the dark horizon. The last of the bombers was already invisible. The general would not sleep that night. 1930 to 2015 hours. Over the Pacific, the bombers settled into cruising altitude, between 5,000 and 8,000 feet, depending on their assigned wings. Radio silence was enforced. Only brief position reports were permitted, sent in code. Inside each pressurized cabin, heat gave way to cold. Condensation frosted the instrument panels. Crews unstrapped, checked systems, and passed around thermos bottles of coffee. The engine drone became constant, a hypnotic vibration that blurred thought. 2045 hours. Aboard Star Duster. Carl Barthold monitored his SCR 522 radio set. Static hissed softly in his earphones. Outside, the ocean below glowed faintly, lines of bioluminescent plankton stirred by wind and prop wash. In his log, he scribbled, 200 miles out. All systems nominal. Sea looks like glowing highways. From the cockpit, Campbell's voice came back. "All right, boys. Settle in. Next stop, Tokyo. 21 to 22:30 hours. The long climb north. For the next 1,000 miles, there was nothing but sea and stars. The moon was a thin crescent. Navigators checked their fixes with handheld sextants through the astrodome above the bomb bay. At intervals, formation lights flickered briefly, confirming each plane's position before going dark again. A gunner in one aircraft stared out and whispered over interphone, "We're ants crossing an ocean." 22:45 hours. In the cockpit of Tall in the saddle. Bakshas studied his instruments. Oil temperature 220 degrees Fahrenheit. Cylinder head temps stable. Fuel flow normal. Fishback monitored the turbos, adjusting boost to equalize power across all engines. The B-29 purred evenly, a rare miracle for the notoriously temperamental R-3350. Muster looked over at Bakshas. "You think LeMay's right? This'll end the war." Bakshas kept his eyes on the horizon. "It'll end something. I'm not sure what." 23:30 hours. The mid-Pacific. Below, the ocean turned to cloud shadow. The fleet of bombers, invisible to one another, invisible to anyone below, pressed on toward Japan. The air was smooth. The night mercilessly calm. Men ate cold sandwiches from wax paper, smoked cigarettes, stared at instrument dials that glowed green in the dark. They had hours yet to fly, but the rhythm of the engines was a kind of clock, ticking toward destiny. 23:50 hours. Guam headquarters. LeMay still sat awake in his Quonset hut. He and his aide, St. Clair McKelway, waited for the first bombs away call. LeMay glanced at his watch. "We won't hear anything for another half hour," he said. "How about a Coca-Cola?" They walked outside into the warm night, carrying the bottles, sitting in the jeep facing the jungle. McKelway later wrote, "Two men, no rank between them, waiting for word that would change history." Far to the north, 10,000 airmen were already approaching the coast of Japan. Pacific Ocean, night of 9 to 10 March 1945. The Pacific stretched below like a continent of ink. No horizon, no land, only darkness and the faint red glow of exhausts trailing thousands of feet behind. For most of the 1,500-mile journey, there was no sound except the pulse of engines and the soft creak of aluminum under stress. The fire that would devour Tokyo was still hours ahead, but its architects were already in motion. 010 hours, March 10, 1945. 800 miles north of Saipan. Inside the Star Duster, Staff Sergeant Carl Barthold adjusted his headset, fighting sleep. The cabin smelled of oil, sweat, and oxygen. His world was wires and static. Every 15 minutes, he tapped a coded position report into the radio key, then logged fuel readings in pencil. He looked through the small blister window, nothing but black sea, shimmering faintly with moonlight. "Ocean looks like glass," he wrote. "Quiet enough to hear the engines thinking." He thought of the man back in their Quonset hut who had packed his gear neatly that afternoon, convinced he wouldn't return. Barthold decided, without knowing why, that he would send a letter home as soon as they landed. 020 hours. Aboard tall in the saddle. Major Sammy Boxes studied the gyro compass, occasionally glancing out at the starlit clouds. Navigator John Hagedorn crawled into the tunnel above the bomb bay, peering through the Astrodome with his handheld sextant. Each reading took minutes, measuring star angles through turbulence, noting times with a stopwatch, then returning to his chart table to correct their course. "Position fix complete," Hagedorn called. "Course holding. Altitude steady." Boxes nodded, his voice low and even. "Good work. Keep us centered. We missed Japan by 20 miles, we missed the world." 045 hours. Formation by absence. There was no formation in the classic sense, no tight clusters of bombers, no navigation lights to guide the eye. Each aircraft was alone in a shared direction, spaced by altitude and luck. Crews could sometimes glimpse another B-29 far ahead, a faint pulse of exhaust flame, gone the next second. Radar operators scanned their scopes for confirmation. The ocean appeared as a smooth arc of light on the screens. Everything else was void. A gunner aboard the Eagle's wing muttered on interphone, "If something happens out here, no one will ever find us." No one answered. 1 o'clock hours. Weather front over the Pacific. The first signs of turbulence appeared. Thin cloud bands rolled beneath the bombers, masking the reflection of the sea. Inside the cabins, moisture condensed on oxygen masks. Engineers monitored temperatures. Cylinder head temps 230 degrees Fahrenheit, oil pressure 90 psi. Good readings, though everyone knew how quickly they could change. The Wright R-3350 was powerful but temperamental. It had a habit of catching fire without warning. Each crewman listened for the tone shift that meant death, the sudden cough of an engine losing compression. Boxes told Fishback quietly, "If one catches, we feather fast. Don't think, just move." "Understood, sir." The engines held. 120 hours. The loneliness of long flight. At this stage of the mission, conversation faded. Men stared at dials. Gunners rotated turrets mechanically, scanning black sky. Oxygen hissed through lines like a metronome. For some, fear dulled into a kind of trance. The Pacific had that effect, endless, depthless, erasing all sense of time. Many later said this was the hardest part of the mission. Not combat, but waiting for combat to begin. 135 hours. Aboard Star Duster. Captain Campbell checked his chart and calculated ETA to the Japanese coast. 2 hours to landfall. Weather clear over target. No intercepts reported. Barthold leaned back, stretching cramped muscles. The plane vibrated constantly, not violently, but enough to make every joint ache. He stared at the red glow of the radio dial, imagining home, imagining Missouri in winter. Somewhere below, unseen, were the ghosts of other missions, B-29s that had ditched and never been found. 150 hours. The voices of command. Across all channels, silence was absolute except for the encoded broadcasts from Guam. A single message pulsed through static. "Meetinghouse active. Proceed as briefed." That was all. The words meant everything. The operation had begun. The first Pathfinders were nearing Tokyo. Each crewman felt it like a change in air pressure. They were no longer flying toward Japan. They were flying toward history. 2 o'clock hours. Night cockpit routines. In tall in the saddle, Boxes adjusted the autopilot slightly to counter a crosswind. Muster, serving as co-pilot, leaned forward to check the instrument panel glow. Fishback monitored manifold pressure, his pencil tapping softly against the clipboard. They spoke little. Each man in the cockpit knew his task by muscle memory. Below them, the sea blurred into cloud. Ahead, faint lightning flickered along the horizon, distant, silent, almost beautiful. Boxes thought of his wife Aldora back in Montana, how he'd once taken her flying over wheat fields in a rented biplane. He wondered briefly if she'd ever know what this night looked like. 2:15 hours. Intermission over the ocean. Crewmen unstrapped briefly to stretch. Coffee was poured from thermos bottles, bitter, metallic. Cigarettes were lit, smoke swirling through cold cabin air before the pressurization system whisked it away. Some gunners swapped stories through the interphone. Baseball scores, hometowns, nothing real. A tail gunner asked, "You think Tokyo knows we're coming?" The radio operator replied, "They'll know soon enough." 2:30 hours. Midway to the Empire, the fleet of bombers began to diverge slightly, each wing adjusting altitude per mission order. Guam's 314th Bomb Wing, 5,000 to 5,500 feet. Tinian's 313th Bomb Wing, 4,000 to 5,000 feet. Saipan's 73rd Bomb Wing, 7,000 to 7,800 feet. It was a three-layer storm of metal sweeping north. The first navigators sighted land on radar, faint echoes of the Bonin Islands, then open sea again. In less than an hour, they would reach Japan's eastern coastline. And then, the world would burn. 2:45 hours. LeMay's headquarters, Guam. LeMay sat rigid in his chair, his face drawn and unreadable. McKelway checked the wall clock. Almost 3 a.m. "They're near Tokyo now," LeMay said. "We'll know soon." He stared into the dark beyond the Quonset window. "I hope to God I'm right." For a long time, neither man spoke. The faint hum of radio static filled the room, a fragile thread connecting Guam to hundreds of men flying over Blackwater. 3 o'clock hours. Japan ahead. From the cockpit of Star Duster, the coast of Honshu appeared as a darker shadow against the night sky. Campbell leaned forward and said softly, "There it is, boys. The Empire." Barthold checked his watch. Time to target, 50 minutes. Tokyo was still asleep, but the fire that would wake it was already inbound. Tokyo in flames. 4:05 hours, March 10, 1945, Tokyo, Japan. The fires were no longer scattered points of light. They had merged into one continuous storm. From 5,000 to 8,000 feet, the city looked like a single breathing organism, its arteries of flame expanding with every gust of wind. Below, nearly 6 million civilians were trapped inside the largest urban fire in recorded history. For 07 hours. Over the target area, the Pathfinder crews completed their final runs and turned south, their instruments flickering from the reflected heat. At those altitudes, the temperature outside should have been near freezing, yet some crews reported cockpit readings over 120 degrees Fahrenheit from the updraft. Smoke and turbulence made the bombers pitch violently. One navigator wrote in his log, "Aircraft felt as if it were being lifted by the breath of the city itself." The firestorm had created its own weather. For 10 hours. Inside the inferno, Honjo and Fukagawa wards. On the ground, wind speeds reached 120 miles per hour. The heat pulled air inward, feeding itself like a furnace. Oxygen vanished, flame replaced it. People who tried to breathe inhaled fire instead of air. Wooden homes exploded in rapid succession as the napalm jets of M69s ignited beams, tatami mats, paper walls, and fuel caches. Bridges across the Sumida River turned into torches. The water itself boiled near the banks. Survivors later described the sound as a giant animal roaring. For 15 hours. Civil defense collapse. Tokyo's fire department, 8,000 men with 1,117 vehicles, had ceased to exist as an organized force. Hydrants ran dry within minutes. Pumps failed from lack of pressure. Civilians attempted bucket brigades with sand and water that evaporated before it touched the flames. Orders to create fire breaks arrived too late. The fire outran every plan. In minutes, the Honjo, Kodo, and Sumida districts were erased. For 20 hours. Witness accounts. 8-year-old Yukiko Hiragama, standing near her family home, remembered. "The sky was red, the ground red, and the air burned inside of my throat. We ran toward the river, but the river was fire too." Nearby, Kyoko Kawasaki, a 36-year-old mother, fled carrying 2 buckets on her head as shields. She later said, "I saw bodies floating in the Sumida. Women who had jumped into the pond, the water boiled. They died in the steam." Tens of thousands tried to reach open fields, only to find the wind driving flames ahead of them. There was no direction that led to safety. 4:25 hours. Aboard Tall in the saddle. Major Sammy Baksh's crew flew through turbulence so strong the bomber shuddered as if struck. The glow below was so bright it turned night into a false sunrise. Smoke reached to 18,000 feet, forming a pillar visible to navigators hundreds of miles away. Flight engineer Leland Fishback called out, "Engine temps climbing 260 degrees." Bakshas responded instantly. Cowl flaps open 2 notches. Keep her cool. We're not cooking her tonight. They emerged from the smoke column and leveled off over Tokyo Bay, the inferno behind them lighting the sea like molten glass. For 30 hours, General Powers command aircraft. From his B-29, Brigadier General Thomas S. Power observed the firestorm's full effect. He spoke into his intercom, his tone flat, professional, almost detached. Marking sectors complete. Fires merged across entire grid. No separate targets remaining. He kept drawing red excess on his map until his crayon wore down to a stub. Then he simply watched, unable to look away. The bombardier beside him said softly, "We're watching a civilization burn." Power didn't answer. He would stay another hour, circling while the city died. For 35 hours. The physics of destruction. The firestorm vortex over Tokyo was so intense that it generated its own microclimate. Winds rushing inward at street level created a tornado of flame nearly 2 miles across. Temperatures exceeded 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit, 982 degrees Celsius. Asphalt boiled. Steel girders bent like wax. Human bodies were reduced to ash in seconds. The storm consumed everything combustible: wood, paper, fabric, oxygen, until even the air itself burned. For 40 hours. The Sumida River, line of death. Tens of thousands of civilians sought refuge in the river, believing water could protect them. But the firestorm followed. Soot and flaming debris rained down, coating the surface until it ignited. Those who jumped and suffocated or boiled alive. Survivors later said the river looked as if it too were on fire. Police and soldiers tried to herd people toward open areas, but most collapsed before they reached them. Bodies lay stacked along the embankments in layers, mothers still clutching children, frozen in gestures of escape. For 45 hours. Imperial Palace sector. By deliberate order, the Imperial Palace and its surrounding moat were spared direct attack. From its gardens, observers could see the horizon pulsing red, the city's reflection mirrored in the palace waters. Emperor Hirohito, awakened in his quarters, stepped onto a balcony and watched without speaking. That sight, some would later say, was the beginning of his private recognition that the war could not be won. For 50 hours. Star Duster leaving target area. Captain Campbell's bomber turned east over the coast. The crew sat in silence, stunned by what they had seen. Barthold typed a brief, coded transmission. Objective destroyed. Fire visible at 100 miles. He removed his headset and stared out the blister window. It wasn't war anymore, he said later. It was pure physics and fire. 5 o'clock hours. Withdrawal over the Pacific. One by one, the bombers cleared the Japanese coastline, heading south toward the Marianas. Some still carried and used bombs, their targets obliterated before arrival. The sky behind them glowed red all the way to the horizon. Smoke climbed into the stratosphere, spreading eastward with the wind, a man-made dawn chasing the retreating bombers. 5:15 hours. Over open water. Radio silence broke for the first time. Voices crackled across frequencies, exhaustion, disbelief, grim relief. Anyone else see that? Could not see it. God help us. The mission had succeeded, and in its success, revealed a new scale of destruction. 5:30 hours. Guam headquarters. At LeMay's operations center, the first coded message arrived. Bombs away. Primary target burning. LeMay leaned over the radio operator's shoulder, eyes locked on the deciphered text. He exhaled slowly. They did it. No cheer followed, only the faint hum of equipment and the knowledge that something irreversible had begun. 5:45 hours. The fire still growing. Back in Tokyo, the conflagration continued to feed on itself. Entire neighborhoods vanished. By dawn, 16 square miles of the city, an area larger than the entire island of Manhattan, would be ash. The flames burned for 8 hours, long after the bombers were gone. The city of paper and wood was gone. The war, however, was not. Ashes of the Empire. March 10, 1945, Tokyo, Japan. Dawn. By sunrise, the wind had died. The fires had not. Smoke drifted low over the ruined city, dense and gray, smelling of salt, ash, and something unnameable. Where Tokyo had stood hours before, there was now only heat and silence. 6 o'clock hours. Ground Zero, Sumida District. The flames burned themselves out just before dawn. The The once busy neighborhoods of Honjo, Fukagawa, and Koto were gone, replaced by a plain of smoking ruin. Every structure within 16 square miles had vanished, wood, paper, flesh, and memory all reduced to carbon. Telephone poles lay melted. Iron kettles were fused into the street stones. The corpses of thousands lay along the riverbanks, stacked where they had fallen. Police and army units moved through the wreckage, stunned. One officer wrote in his logbook, "We can no longer tell where the streets were. Only the bridges remain, leading to nothing." 6:30 hours. Civilian survivors. Those who lived through the night wandered the ruins like shadows. Many were burned beyond recognition, their clothes fused to their skin. They carried buckets, ropes, or the remains of possessions clutched tightly in both hands, instinct clinging to routine. One man was seen bowing repeatedly toward the rising sun amid a field of bodies. Another pushed a wheelbarrow holding the ashes of his family. A schoolgirl, Yukiko Hiragama, later recalled, "There was no color, only gray and white. I thought it had snowed until I touched the snow, and it was ash." 7 o'clock hours. Firefighting units return. Fire crews from western Tokyo reached the area too late to save anything. Water pressure was gone. Pumps lay melted. They moved through wreckage that still burned from underground cellars. Every so often, a building that had survived the initial inferno would collapse into its own embers. In reports written that morning, commanders noted temperatures in the ruins still above 300 degrees Celsius, 572 degrees Fahrenheit. Even metal helmets warped in the heat. 7:30 hours. Imperial Palace sector. The moats of the Imperial Palace reflected an orange dawn over blackened horizons. Emperor Hirohito and several aides surveyed the destruction from an upper balcony. He said nothing, only stood motionless as smoke drifted over the palace gardens. One chamberlain later recalled the emperor whispering, "The capital has ceased to exist." For the first time, Hirohito ordered a detailed report of civilian damage to be delivered directly to him, not through military channels. That report, carried to him later that day, would become the first official acknowledgement that Japan's home front could not withstand the war much longer. 8 o'clock hours. The numbers. Initial Japanese estimates listed 83,000 dead, 41,000 wounded, and over 1 million homeless. Later analysis would raise the number of dead to at least 100,000, possibly as high as 200,000, most of them women, children, and the elderly. Within a single night, Tokyo's population fell by nearly half. The city's industrial production, small machine shops, assembly yards, home-based suppliers, was annihilated. The destruction exceeded that caused by the atomic bombs that would later fall on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. 8:30 hours. Over the Pacific, returning bombers. Far south, hundreds of B-29s droned back across the ocean toward the Marianas. Inside the cabins, men sat quiet. No one celebrated. They had seen too much fire to feel triumph. Staff Sergeant Carl Barthold of Star Duster wrote in his notebook, "We were above it. We didn't hear screams or see faces, but every one of us knew what we'd done." Some crews discussed the glow that had followed them for hours, a reflection on the sea that looked like sunrise even at midnight. 9:15 hours. Near Saipan, the first B-29s began descending toward Isley Field. Control towers guided them home through a haze of fatigue and disbelief. Engines coughed as throttles pulled back, wheels locked down hard on coral runways. Ground crews ran forward, counting returning aircraft. Of the 334 bombers that took off the previous evening, 279 reached the target. 3 ditched at sea on the return, a dozen aborted, and several crashed near the islands, but for a mission of such scale, losses were considered light. Every commander knew how close it had come to catastrophe. 9:45 hours. Guam North Field. Brigadier General Thomas S. Power landed first, his engines still idling as he climbed out, eyes darkened with fatigue and smoke. Major General Curtis LeMay met him at the edge of the runway. Neither man saluted. Power said simply, "Anti-aircraft was light. Fires more than we imagined." LeMay asked results. "Total," Power replied. LeMay gave a slow nod, a grim acknowledgement. Then he turned toward his operations tent without another word. 10 o'clock hours. Debriefings. Crews gathered in briefing huts, handed tin cups of coffee, and filled out mission forms. Questions were short: altitude, time over target, bomb load expended. Answers were automatic. When asked to describe the target area, one pilot wrote a single word: gone. No one used the term victory. No one said war crime. The language had not yet caught up with what they had done. 10:30 hours. Technical evaluation. LeMay's analysts compiled data from all wings. Fuel consumption within expected range. Engine failures minimal. Loss rate 3.6%. Target destruction 99% within designated area. It was, by every military metric, the most successful bombing mission in history. And the most lethal. 11 o'clock hours. Personal reactions. Back at his quarters, Sammy Bakshas removed his flight jacket and set it on the cot. He stared at his hands, black with grease and soot, and thought of Montana snow, the opposite of what he had just seen. Captain Gordon Muster poured coffee into a tin cup and muttered, "We burned a city, Sam." Bakshas said nothing for a long time. Then quietly, "Maybe we ended the war. Maybe we just changed it." 12 o'clock hours. Command reflections. That afternoon, LeMay met with his staff. The decision was immediate: repeat the tactic. Osaka, Nagoya, Kobe, all would follow. He leaned over the map of Japan and drew circles around the next targets. "We've found their weakness," he said flatly. "Fireworks." None of the officers present objected. The results from Tokyo had already written the doctrine in ash. Evening, March 10, 1945, Tokyo. The fires finally died. Smoke drifted into the upper atmosphere, turning the sunset blood red. A silence settled over the ruins, a silence so deep that survivors said they could hear the wind moving through charred beams like a whispering voice. Somewhere in the city center, a clock still stood amid the rubble. Its hands had melted and fused at 2:46 a.m., the moment the firestorm reached full strength. That time would remain frozen as the hour Tokyo died. Epilogue: The cost of fire. In the months that followed, US B-29s would firebomb 66 Japanese cities, destroying 169 square miles of urban area. An estimated 9.2 million civilians were left homeless. Yet it was this single night, 9 to 10 March 1945, that broke the empire's belief in invincibility. When Japan finally surrendered 5 months later, many historians would argue that the end began not with the atomic bomb, but with fire. The fire spread doctrine. March 11, 1945, Guam, North Field. Morning after Tokyo. The smell of burnt fuel lingered even 1,500 miles away. Smoke from Tokyo's destruction had reached the upper atmosphere and was spreading east across the Pacific, faint streaks visible even at sunrise. On the ground, crews slept in tents, their uniforms still reeking of oil and sweat. Inside headquarters, the war had already moved on. 7 o'clock hours. Operations Hut, 21st Bomber Command. Major General Curtis E. LeMay sat at a table covered in charts, photographs, and ash-colored aerial prints. Beside him stood Brigadier General Thomas Power, exhausted but methodical, reporting losses and mission data. A wall map of Japan, covered in red circles, marked both past and future targets. LeMay drew his cigar slowly across the surface, tapping Tokyo's blackened square. "They said high altitude was the only way," he muttered. "They were wrong. Low and hot. That's how we finish this war." He turned to his staff. "This is the new procedure. Incendiaries, low level, no guns. Every major city will follow." No debate followed. The doctrine had already written itself in flame. 8:30 hours. Drafting Field Order Number 44. Typewriters clacked as officers composed the follow-up directive. Field Order Number 44, Operation Meetinghouse Results and Continuation. It read in part, "The success of low-level incendiary attacks upon Tokyo warrants continuation of similar missions against industrial urban concentrations in the Japanese homeland. Primary objective, complete destruction of manufacturing capacity and civilian morale through fire application. Targets, Nagoya, Osaka, Kobe, Yokohama. Timing, one city every 3 days. Each to be bombed with a force of no fewer than 300 B-29s. 9:15 hours. Engineering review. In the maintenance hangars, mechanics inspected returning aircraft. Engines were scorched from heat exposure, aluminum skins showed signs of mild warping. But loss rates were far below those from high-altitude missions. The conclusion was unanimous. The Superfortress had been built for endurance, and now it had found its purpose. Lieutenant Colonel Robert S. McNamara, LeMay's statistical officer, summarized it with cold precision. Less than 4% attrition. 17 square miles destroyed. Mission efficiency, optimum. McNamara's charts turned devastation into data points. From that data, a doctrine was born. 10 o'clock hours. Briefing room, Guam. Pilots and crew chiefs gathered again, this time not for rest but for review. Photographs of Tokyo's ruins were projected onto a screen, aerial shots showing the once living city reduced to a patchwork of white ash and black outlines where canals and roads had been. LeMay stood before them, blunt as always. This is what works. We're done wasting bombs at 30,000 feet. You'll go in at 5 to 8,000. Keep your turrets light. Drop your load and get out. Someone asked, what about civilians? LeMay's response was immediate. Every factory worker, every house producing parts, every cottage making bolts, that's a target. We're not bombing people. We're bombing war. No one answered, but the silence carried its own understanding. 11:30 hours. Press office, Pacific Theater Command. A communique drafted for Washington described the Tokyo mission as a decisive blow to Japan's war industry. Civilian casualties were omitted. The official figure given to the War Department, 83,793 dead, 40,918 injured, 267,000 buildings destroyed. Unofficially, analysts estimated far higher. Yet the success ratio, tonnage versus damage, stunned even hardened officers. A single night's bombing had produced more destruction than 3 months of high-altitude precision attacks. Fire had become America's most efficient weapon. 1,300 hours. Psychological impact. Intercepted Japanese radio transmissions revealed chaos. The city has ceased to exist. All water, mains broken, corpses fill the rivers. LeMay's intelligence chief underlined one phrase in red ink, fear of fire from the sky. That fear, they realized, was now a strategic asset. Civil defense collapsed, morale plummeted, and factories went silent across Japan's urban belt. Every household now knew what one night of B-29s could do. 1,400 hours. Tinian Island. Preparation for next mission. On Tinian's North Field, crews began loading incendiaries into the bomb bays again. Rows of E-46 cluster units lay on wooden pallets, gleaming silver under the sun. Each contained M69 napalm bomblets identical to those that had incinerated Tokyo. Ground crews joked quietly, calling them the city burners. In less than 48 hours, those same clusters would fall over Nagoya. 15:30 hours. Washington, D.C. At the Pentagon, General Henry Hap Arnold, commander of the U.S. Army Air Forces, received LeMay's report. He read it twice, then handed it to an aide. Tell him, Arnold said, to keep going, until there's nothing left to bomb. That simple order effectively sanctioned the firebombing of the Japanese home islands, an authorization that would last until the atomic missions. 1,800 hours. Saipan briefing tent. Crews returning from Tokyo were already being reassigned. Fatigue mattered less than momentum. LeMay's operations planner addressed the assembled airmen. Gentlemen, you've proven the concept. Tokyo was the test. Japan is the target. Maps of Osaka and Kobe were pinned to the board. The same words appeared across the top of each, low-level NO guns. 2,000 hours. Camp Mess Hall, Guam. In the chow line, conversation was minimal. Most men ate in silence. A few scribbled letters home that would never mention Tokyo. Others sat staring into tin cups of coffee, lost somewhere between duty and disbelief. One waist gunner murmured to no one in particular, "We didn't drop bombs last night. We dropped hell." 2,300 hours. LeMay's quarters, North Field. LeMay removed his flight jacket, hung it over the back of a chair, and sat with a notepad. He wrote 3 words at the top, "Fire is strategy." Then, in his blunt handwriting, a note to himself. Efficiency outweighs sentiment. The enemy understands destruction, not persuasion. Continue until surrender or annihilation. He set down the pen, leaned back, and stared into the dark Pacific night. Somewhere far to the north, Japan was still smoldering. The doctrine of fire had begun.